Well, today I'm not going to talk directly about Afghanistan. I think that even though that situation is ongoing, I'm tired of talking about it in particular, but there's a lot, as I said, to discuss moving forward because this is a pivot point in the Biden administration and potentially a pivot point in American history. And I'm still reasoning through a lot of the implications of this week. The first implication to me is that uh, the the regime, as I use the term broadly to refer to the DC establishment, I use that term a lot this week, uh, they have no backup plan. Even though Joe is floundering, they can't take him out and put in Kamala. If you're going to get Joe out of there, I think that Kamala is going to go first. I'm not the only person saying this. I'm far from the first person to say that. But at this point, after this week, I completely agree with that position. Uh, Kamala is obviously, hiding out this week, hoping that all of this blame falls on Joe and that somehow makes her look better. It's not going to work. Kamala Harris is too unlikable within the elite. She was popular within the media, but in terms of the actual power brokers within the regime, various donors and uh, bureaucrats and some such, nobody likes to work with her, and so she's not an option moving forward. And so, therefore, um, the only thing I can see happening now is that there will be a pivot away from Afghanistan, a hard pivot, um, back to probably the Wu flu. And in order to um, escape what is essentially universal condemnation on the issue of Afghanistan, both people left and right, politically, can look at the situation and say this is not being handled well, this is a disaster. And so a better issue than that for Biden and the administration more broadly would be to pivot back to the Wu flu and enact some very divisive policies that will, at the very least, energize the left half of America. It's hard to say, it's hard to call anybody Biden's base, but the mask Karen types, those sorts of people, the people who are deathly afraid of the virus, who are hiding in their house and refuse to talk on the phone to any of their relatives who aren't vaccinated because they think that they'll get sick through the telephone. Because at the end of the day, uh, the only thing that both sides of the political spectrum, both parties, have to fall back on when they utterly fail at doing their jobs is boilerplate culture war issues. And right now, the focal point of the culture war is the Wu flu. And so I don't know if we're going to go right into an interstate travel vaccine mandate. I think that a vaccine mandate for airports is something that is quite realistic. I think that that would be a first step. I don't think that we're going to go straight to, the Federal Department of Transportation stopping people at state borders on the interstate and checking them if they're vaccinated or not. We could get to that point eventually, but for now, I think that's a little too extreme. Uh, but the airplane thing, I think, certainly could be on deck. Also, the Department of Education could mandate masks in all American public schools. The Department of Education has much more power over public schools than the state governments do, and so even though Ron DeSantis in Florida is trying to mandate that, or I shouldn't say mandate, he's trying to stop districts from mandating that students wear masks. He's been unable to stop them from imposing those kinds of rules. Now, it's still working its way through the courts, but as of right now, a lot of major school districts that contain a good chunk of the Florida population are currently in defiance of DeSantis' order, and this is something that Biden would look at as a winning issue, certainly compared to Afghanistan. And so, I don't know about in other parts of the country, but certainly here in Florida, the school mask mandate thing has been all over the news, about as much as Afghanistan. But it's not good enough for Biden just to, have this issue being big in Florida. If he would want this across the country and in all 50 states. And so that means not just taking on Ron DeSantis, it means taking on all of the Republican governors and mandating this throughout the country. So those are the first two things that I see coming down the pike in the wake of this Afghanistan disaster. Vaccine mandates to fly on a plane, and mask mandates for public schools. Once the drug has been approved, the vaccine has been approved for kids under 12, I would not be surprised to see the Department of Education, maybe not all at once, but move in the direction of mandating vaccines for all children. It might seem extreme now, but everything that has already happened seemed extreme at some point in the past year and a half, and yet they always come to pass. No matter what, ridiculous thing ends up getting approved by the leaders of our regime, they find ever more ridiculous measures to impose on us later. They have to keep turning the screws and making people feel like there's more and more pressure on them, because nothing that they do is really going to stop the virus from happening. And, I think they know that, at least some of them. I think a lot of people probably within the regime are true believers, but, at a certain level, like the Faucis of the world, they can't, they don't believe what they're actually saying. And so there's two ways of looking at this. Either they continue turning the screws more and more and putting more pressure on people so that people feel like they're doing something about the virus, even though they know it's all in vain, and they're just essentially doing it for optics. They want to look like they're tough on the virus. It's kind of like how politicians want to look like they're tough on drugs, so they pass harsher mandatory minimum sentences for drug possession, and then you put away a guy who has a little packet of crack. You put him away for 40 years, and that does nothing to stop the spread of drugs and drug addiction in this country. But at least politicians like Joe Biden and whoever else was around back then in the 90s, were able to look tough and say, hey, I'm doing something about this crime problem that you guys are so concerned about. Now, the other way to look at this is that they know that what they're doing makes no difference, but they're doing it just for the sake of power. And so they use whatever is going on with the virus, no matter what the numbers are. They say, oh my gosh, it's terrible, it's worse than it's ever been, even if that's objectively not true. They just keep saying it's worse and worse and worse and worse, and you're all going to die, and scare people into allowing them to seize ever more and more power. Because all of these powers will never be rolled back. The vaccine mandates will never be rolled back. They might be spun into something else. It might, the vaccine component of it might disappear entirely down the road. But I guarantee you, in New York City, you will always have to show an ID to get into a restaurant or any other sort of public accommodation now. It will be a way of tracking people forever. And that's just an example of one policy. This is true with all of these various ridiculous policies, like the mask thing. All that is about building compliance. And with a certain segment of the population, they respond very well to this sort of thing. They like to be trained, they like to be told what to do, and they like to be told that they're good boys and girls. And they feel much better about Joe Biden when they're being told what to wear in the morning and what to eat for breakfast than they are when they're witnessing a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. So the worse things get in Afghanistan, the worse Biden will have to get domestically on the matters of restricting civil liberties and anything related to the Wu flu. The more you will have to see the virus hysteria ramp up in order to counter any concerns over Afghanistan. Now, what's interesting is that the media is going very hard against Biden over the Afghan issue, and it's not making it so easy for them to pivot to the Wu flu. I'll be interested to see how long that keeps up. Obviously, the media is full of bloodthirsty warmongers who would just love to see the Afghan war ramp back up and are absolutely disgusted that it is ever coming to an end, no matter how bad or how well the withdrawal ended up going. But thankfully, I haven't spent much time talking about that because they are such a small minority. They're not going to convince people based on all this reporting. The takeaways are not, gee, we need to go back into Afghanistan. That's the last thing that anybody's thinking about right now, except for some folks in the media. But at some point, they will calm down on this Afghan issue and will go back to being, loyal stenographers. And the virus hysteria will be worse, I think, than it has been before. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.